In a world where success is often measured by the size of one's bank account, true wealth lies in the strength of one's character. This is the story of Jack Harris, a humble janitor whose unwavering integrity sparked a chain reaction of change, touching lives across New York City and beyond. From the polished floors of a luxury high-rise to the heart of a struggling neighborhood, Jack's journey is a testament to the power of kindness, the value of standing up for what's right, and the profound impact one person can have on an entire community. Before we continue, leave a comment below telling me where you're watching this video from. I'd love to know. As we delve into Jack's tale, prepare to be inspired by a man who dared to challenge the status quo, risking everything to defend the dignity of others. His path from janitor to community leader is more than just a rags-to-riches story. It's a powerful reminder that true success comes not from what we accumulate, but from the lives we touch and the legacy we leave behind. Join us as we explore the twists and turns of Jack's remarkable journey, witnessing the ripple effects of compassion in a city known for its indifference, and discovering how one act of kindness can set in motion a wave of transformation that touches hearts, changes lives, and reshapes the very fabric of a community. In the bustling heart of New York City, where dreams soar as high as the skyscrapers that punctuate the skyline, Jack Harris moved through life like a ghost. Each day, as the first light of dawn kissed the glass and steel giants of Manhattan, Jack would don his gray uniform, a badge of both pride and invisibility. He was the janitor, the unseen guardian of cleanliness and order in a world that rarely spared him a second glance. The Obsidian Tower, as it was known to its well-heeled residents, stood as a monument to luxury and excess. Its penthouse, a crystal palace in the sky, was home to Blake Anderson, a billionaire whose fortune was matched only by the coldness of his heart. Blake's world was one of sleek surfaces and sharp edges, where the value of a person was measured in dollars and cents, and compassion was viewed as a weakness to be exploited. As Jack moved through the building's opulent lobby, mop in hand, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the disparity between his world and that of the tower's residents. The marble floors gleamed under his careful ministrations, reflecting the hurried steps of men and women in tailored suits and designer dresses. They moved past him as if he were part of the furniture, their eyes never meeting his, their conversations never faltering to acknowledge his presence. Yet Jack carried himself with quiet dignity. His hands, calloused from years of honest work, moved with purpose and care. He took pride in his job, knowing that his efforts, though unrecognized, contributed to the comfort and cleanliness of the building. Each streak-free window, each spotless surface, was a testament to his dedication. As he worked, Jack's mind often wandered to his family. His wife Sarah, whose smile could light up even the darkest corners of their modest apartment, and his two children, Emily and Michael. They were his reason for persevering, the source of warmth that sustained him through long hours and thankless tasks. In the eyes of his loved ones, Jack wasn't invisible. He was a hero, a provider, a beacon of strength and love. The contrast between the lives of the building's residents and his own reality was stark. While Blake Anderson's biggest concern might be the performance of his stock portfolio, Jack wrestled with more pressing matters: how to stretch his meager paycheck to cover rent, groceries, and the ever-growing list of school supplies his children needed. Yet he never begrudged the wealthy their good fortune. Instead, Jack held on to a simple philosophy: that kindness and integrity were worth more than all the riches in the world. As the morning wore on, Jack found himself on the top floor, just outside Blake Anderson's penthouse. Through the slightly ajar door, he could hear Blake barking orders into his phone, his voice sharp with impatience and disdain. "I don't care about the consequences," Blake snapped. "Make it happen, or you're fired. There's always someone else willing to do what it takes to succeed." Jack shook his head softly, feeling a mixture of pity and disappointment. He wondered if Blake ever experienced true happiness, if the man's wealth brought him any real joy. From what Jack had observed over the years, it seemed that the more Blake acquired, the more miserable and isolated he became. Continuing his rounds, Jack made his way back to the lobby, where he encountered Mary Thompson, one of the building's longest-standing residents. Unlike many of the other tenants, Mary always had a kind word and a warm smile for Jack. She was in her 80s now, her steps slower and less sure, but her eyes still sparkled with a youthful vitality. "Good morning, Jack," Mary greeted him, her voice warm and full of genuine affection. "How are Sarah and the kids doing?" Jack's face lit up at the mention of his family. "They're doing well, Mrs. Thompson. Thank you for asking. Emily just won her school's spelling bee, and Michael scored his first goal in soccer last weekend." Mary beamed, clearly delighted by the news. "Oh, that's wonderful. You must be so proud. You know, Jack, the world needs more fathers like you. Men who understand that true wealth lies in the love we give and the lives we touch." As they chatted, neither noticed the approach of Gerald Hawthorne, one of the building's newer and more disagreeable residents. Gerald was a man who wore his wealth like armor, using it to shield himself from the common courtesies most people extended to one another. "Excuse me," Gerald interrupted brusquely, his voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "Some of us have important matters to attend to. We can't all stand around gossiping all day." Jack immediately stepped aside, murmuring an apology, but Mary stood her ground, her spine straightening as she faced Gerald. "Young man," she began, her voice firm despite her advanced years, "there is nothing more important in this world than treating others with kindness and respect. Perhaps if you took a moment to engage with the people around you, you might find that your important matters pale in comparison to the richness of human connection." Gerald's face flushed with anger, unused to being challenged, especially by someone he deemed beneath his station. "How dare you?" he sputtered. "Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy and sell this entire building if I wanted to." It was at this moment that Jack made a decision that would alter the course of his life. Seeing the distress on Mary's face and feeling a surge of protective instinct, he stepped forward, placing himself between Mary and the irate Gerald. "Sir," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm, "I understand you're in a hurry, but there's no need for rudeness. Mrs. Thompson is a respected member of this community, and she deserves to be treated with dignity. We all do, regardless of our position or wealth." Gerald's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. "You?" he spat. "A mere janitor dares to lecture me on respect? I'll have your job for this impertinence." As Gerald stormed off towards the management office, Jack felt a mixture of dread and resolve settle in his stomach. He knew he had likely just cost himself his job, but looking at Mary's grateful face and feeling the rightness of his actions, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Mary reached out and squeezed Jack's hand. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "You're a good man. Whatever happens, know that you did the right thing." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. As he watched Gerald disappear into the manager's office, he couldn't help but wonder what consequences his act of kindness would bring. Little did he know that this moment, this simple stand for decency and respect, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would not only change his life, but touch the lives of countless others in ways he could never have imagined. The fallout from Jack's confrontation with Gerald was swift and merciless. Within the hour, he found himself standing before Mr. Clarence Wilkes, the building's stern-faced manager, whose pinched expression suggested he had just bitten into something particularly sour. "Harris," Wilkes began, his voice a mixture of exasperation and resignation, "I've known you to be a reliable employee for years, but this is simply unacceptable. Mr. Hawthorne is threatening to take his considerable business elsewhere if we don't address this egregious lack of respect immediately." Jack stood tall, his work-worn hands clasped behind his back. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him, but he refused to bow under its pressure. "Mr. Wilkes," he said, his voice steady, "I understand the position this puts you in, but I couldn't stand by and watch Mrs. Thompson be treated that way. It wasn't right." Wilkes sighed, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. "Right and wrong don't pay the bills, Harris. Mr. Hawthorne's monthly maintenance fees are worth more than your yearly salary. I'm sorry, but I have no choice. You're fired, effective immediately." The words hit Jack like a physical blow, but he managed to maintain his composure. He nodded once, then turned to leave the office. As he reached for the door handle, Wilkes spoke again, his voice softer this time. "For what it's worth, Harris, I think you did the right thing, but in this world, doing the right thing often comes at a cost. Jack paused, looking back at Wilkes. "Some costs are worth paying, sir," he replied quietly, then stepped out of the office for the last time. As Jack made his way to the employee locker room to gather his belongings, the reality of his situation began to sink in. How would he tell Sarah? How would they manage without his income? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. But as he changed out of his uniform for the final time, folding it neatly despite knowing he'd never wear it again, Jack felt a flicker of something unexpected. Pride. He had stood up for what was right, had defended someone who needed defending. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them knowing he had acted with integrity. Emerging from the locker room, Jack was surprised to find Mary Thompson waiting for him in the hallway. Her eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she had been crying, but her expression was one of fierce determination. "Jack," she said, reaching out to clasp his hand, "I can't tell you how sorry I am. This is all my fault. If I hadn't—" Jack shook his head, cutting her off gently. "Mrs. Thompson, please don't blame yourself. I made my choice, and I stand by it. You have nothing to feel sorry for." Mary's eyes welled up again, but she blinked back the tears. "You're a good man, Jack Harris. A rare soul in this cold city. I want you to know that I'm not going to let this stand. I may be old, but I still have some fight left in me." Jack smiled, touched by her concern. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Thompson, but please don't trouble yourself. I'll land on my feet somehow. Always have." As they talked, neither noticed the sleek black car that had pulled up outside the building, nor the distinguished gentleman who emerged from it, his eyes scanning the lobby with purpose. It wasn't until Jack had said his goodbyes to Mary and stepped out onto the bustling New York sidewalk that he became aware of the man's presence. Tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet wealth, the stranger exuded an air of authority tempered with kindness. "Mr. Harris?" the man called out, causing Jack to turn in surprise. "My name is Charles Anderson. I believe we need to talk." Jack hesitated, confusion evident on his face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, but I don't think we've met. If this is about the building, I'm afraid I no longer work here." Charles smiled, a warm expression that immediately put Jack at ease. "Oh, I'm well aware of that, Mr. Harris. In fact, it's precisely why I'm here. You see, my wife Mary has told me all about what happened this morning." Realization dawned on Jack's face. "You're Mrs. Thompson's husband?" Charles nodded, extending his hand. "Indeed I am, and I must say I'm impressed by what I've heard. It's not often one encounters such unwavering integrity, especially in the face of personal loss." Jack shook the offered hand, still uncertain about where this conversation was heading. "I appreciate that, Mr. Anderson, but I was just doing what anyone should do." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. Harris," Charles replied, his eyes twinkling. "What you did is far from common. In fact, it's exactly the kind of character I've been searching for." He gestured towards his car, where a chauffeur stood at attention by the open rear door. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Harris, one that I believe could change not only your life, but the lives of many others. Would you be willing to hear me out?" Jack glanced at the car, then back at Charles, weighing his options. On one hand, he had just lost his job and needed to start looking for new employment immediately. On the other, there was something about Charles Anderson that inspired trust, a sense that this man's words carried weight and purpose. After a moment's hesitation, Jack nodded. "All right, Mr. Anderson. I'm listening." As Jack slid into the plush leather seat of the car, he couldn't help but feel that he was stepping into a new chapter of his life. The New York streets blurred past the tinted windows, and Jack found himself wondering where this unexpected turn of events would lead him. Little did he know that this chance encounter, born from a simple act of kindness, was about to open doors he never knew existed and set him on a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, wealth, and the true meaning of making a difference in the world. The car glided through the bustling streets of New York, a cocoon of quiet luxury that stood in stark contrast to the chaos outside. Jack sat in silence, his calloused hands resting awkwardly on his knees, acutely aware of the disparity between his worn work clothes and the opulent interior of the vehicle. Charles Anderson, by contrast, seemed perfectly at ease. He studied Jack with keen interest, as if trying to read the very essence of the man before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was warm and direct. "Mr. Harris, I want you to know that what you did today, standing up for my wife, risking your livelihood to defend what's right, that's a rare quality in this world. It's the kind of integrity that can't be bought or taught. It's innate." Jack shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "I appreciate that, Mr. Anderson. But really, I was just doing what anyone should do. Your wife has always been kind to me, and I couldn't stand by and watch her be mistreated." Charles nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And that, Mr. Harris, is precisely why I believe you're the perfect person for what I have in mind." The car turned off the main road, winding its way through quieter streets lined with stately brownstones. Jack's curiosity got the better of him. "And what exactly do you have in mind, Mr. Anderson? I'm afraid I'm a bit lost here." Charles leaned forward, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "Tell me, Mr. Harris, what do you know about the Riverside District?" Jack's brow furrowed in thought. "Not much, I'm afraid. I know it's one of the poorer areas of the city. High unemployment, struggling schools, that sort of thing." "Exactly," Charles confirmed. "It's a neighborhood that's been overlooked and underserved for far too long. But I believe it has potential, not just economic potential, but human potential. The people there are resilient, hardworking, and deserving of a chance to thrive." The car came to a stop, and Charles gestured for Jack to look out the window. They had arrived at the edge of the Riverside District. From their vantage point, Jack could see streets lined with rundown buildings, empty storefronts, and small groups of people gathered on corners, their postures speaking of weariness and resignation. "For years," Charles continued, "I've been looking for a way to make a real difference here. Not just throwing money at the problem, but creating sustainable change. I've come to believe that what this community needs is a center, a place that can serve as a hub for education, job training, childcare, and community building." He turned back to Jack, his expression serious. "I have the resources to build such a place, Mr. Harris. What I've been lacking is someone with the heart, the integrity, and the understanding to run it. Someone who knows what it means to struggle, to work hard, and to hold on to their principles even when it costs them everything. Someone like you." Jack's eyes widened as the implication of Charles's words sank in. "Mr. Anderson, I'm not sure I understand. Are you offering me a job?" Charles chuckled softly. "Not just a job, Mr. Harris. I'm offering you an opportunity to change lives, including your own. I want you to be the director of this community center. You'll have full autonomy to shape its programs, hire staff, and guide its mission. Your experiences, your work ethic, and most importantly, your character, make you uniquely qualified for this role." Jack felt as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. Just hours ago, he had been mopping floors, invisible to most of the people he served. Now he was being offered a chance to lead a project that could transform an entire community. The magnitude of it was almost overwhelming. I don't know what to say, Mr. Anderson," Jack stammered. "I'm honored by your offer, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like this. I don't have a college degree. I've never run anything bigger than my daughter's lemonade stand." Charles leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Jack, may I call you Jack? Formal education and management experience are not what this project needs most. It needs heart. It needs someone who understands the value of hard work and treating people with dignity. Someone who can inspire others because they lead by example. Everything else can be learned." As Charles spoke, the car began to move again, slowly cruising through the streets of Riverside. Jack watched the neighborhood pass by, children playing on cracked sidewalks, elderly residents sitting on worn stoops, young men and women with eyes that held both weariness and untapped potential. "This community has been promised change before," Charles continued, his voice soft but fervent. "They've seen politicians make grand speeches and developers draw up flashy plans, only to be left behind when those promises proved empty. What they need now is someone who will roll up their sleeves and work alongside them, someone they can trust to have their best interests at heart." Jack felt a stirring in his chest, a mixture of fear and excitement. He thought of his own family, of the struggles they'd faced and the dreams they held. He thought of the countless others like them in this very neighborhood, people who only needed a chance to show what they were capable of. "It won't be easy," Charles warned. "You'll face skepticism, resistance, and countless challenges. There will be days when you question whether you're making any difference at all. But I believe, no, I know, that you have the strength and the character to persevere." The car came to a stop in front of an empty lot, overgrown with weeds but spanning nearly a full city block. Charles gestured towards it. "This is where we'll build the center. It's not much to look at now, but imagine what it could become, a beacon of hope and opportunity for this community." Jack stared at the lot, his mind racing with possibilities. He saw beyond the weeds and debris, envisioning a bustling center filled with learning, laughter, and growth. For the first time since losing his job that morning, he felt a spark of true hope. Turning back to Charles, Jack took a deep breath. "Mr. Anderson, it's more than I ever could have imagined. I won't pretend I'm not scared. This is way outside anything I've ever done before. But if you truly believe I can make a difference here, then I want to try. I want to give it everything I've got." Charles' face broke into a wide smile and he clasped Jack's hand firmly. "That's all I can ask for, Jack. Your determination and your heart are exactly what this project needs. Together, we're going to change lives." As they shook hands, Jack felt as if he was stepping onto a new path, one filled with both daunting challenges and incredible potential. He thought of Sarah and the kids, of the example he could set for them. He thought of the community around him, of the lives that could be transformed. "When do we start?" Jack asked, a new sense of purpose filling his voice. Charles grinned. "We already have. Welcome to your new journey, Jack. The real work begins now." As the car pulled away from the lot, Jack's mind was already racing with ideas and plans. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, truly purposeful. This was more than just a job. It was a calling, a chance to make a real difference in the world. Little did Jack know that this was just the beginning. The challenges, triumphs, and transformations that lay ahead would test him in ways he never imagined, pushing him to grow, to lead, and to redefine what it means to live a life of true success and meaning. The weeks that followed Jack's unexpected job offer were a whirlwind of activity, learning, and adjustment. Each morning, as the sun rose over the New York skyline, Jack found himself stepping into a world that was simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar. Gone were the days of blending into the background, mop in hand. Now, Jack stood at the forefront of a project that held the potential to transform an entire community. The empty lot that Charles had shown him was slowly coming to life, transitioning from a weed-choked eyesore to the bustling site of what would become the Riverside Community Center. Jack threw himself into the work with characteristic determination. He spent long hours poring over architectural plans, studying successful community programs from across the country, and most importantly, getting to know the people of Riverside. He walked the streets, introducing himself to residents, shopkeepers, and local leaders, listening to their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. Many were skeptical at first. Riverside had seen its share of well-intentioned outsiders making grand promises, only to disappear when the going got tough. But there was something about Jack, his earnestness, his willingness to listen, and his obvious dedication, that began to win people over. One particularly memorable encounter came on a sweltering summer afternoon. Jack was walking back to the construction site when he noticed a group of teenagers lounging on the steps of a boarded-up building. Their postures were defensive, their eyes wary as they watched him approach. "Afternoon," Jack called out, offering a friendly wave. "Mind if I join you for a minute? This heat's something else." The teens exchanged glances, then shrugged. A lanky boy with close-cropped hair and keen eyes spoke up. "Suit yourself, mister, but if you're selling something, we ain't buying." Jack chuckled as he sat down on the bottom step. "Not selling a thing, just looking to chat, if you're willing. I'm Jack Harris. I'm working on that new community center they're building down the block." The mention of the center sparked interest among the group. A girl with vibrant braids leaned forward. For real? We heard about that. What's it gonna be anyway? Some fancy place for rich folks to feel good about helping the poor? The bitterness in her voice was palpable, but Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he met her gaze steadily. Actually, I was hoping you could tell me what it should be. This center? It's for you, for this community. But it won't mean a thing if it's not what you actually need. His words hung in the air for a moment, the teens clearly taken aback by his directness. Then, slowly, they began to talk. They spoke of the lack of safe spaces to hang out after school, of the difficulty in finding jobs without connections or experience, of dreams deferred because of limited resources and opportunities. Jack listened intently, asking questions and taking mental notes. By the time he stood to leave, nearly 2 hours had passed. The group's initial wariness had given way to cautious optimism. "You really think you can make a difference here?" the lanky boy asked, his tone a mixture of hope and skepticism. Jack paused, considering his words carefully. "I think we can make a difference together. This center, it's not about me swooping in to save anybody. It's about creating a space where this community can come together, support each other, and build something amazing. But it's going to take all of us working together to make it happen." As he walked away, Jack could hear the teens talking excitedly among themselves. He smiled, knowing that he had just recruited some of the center's most important advisors. Encounters like this became a regular part of Jack's days. He made it his mission to understand the true needs and aspirations of the Riverside community. This grassroots approach didn't always sit well with some of the project's more traditional stakeholders. Jack found himself navigating a complex web of city regulations, donor expectations, and community desires. One particularly challenging meeting took place in Charles Anderson's sleek downtown office. Jack sat across from Charles and a group of potential donors, all impeccably dressed and exuding an air of impatience. "Mr. Harris," one of the donors, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, began. "We've reviewed your proposed programs for the center, and frankly, we're concerned. Where's the emphasis on college preparation? On entrepreneurship? These are the skills that will truly elevate this community." Jack took a deep breath, reminding himself of the conversations he'd had with countless Riverside residents. "Ma'am, I understand your perspective, but what I've learned from talking with the community is that their immediate needs are more fundamental. Many of these families are struggling with basic necessities: childcare, job skills training, even access to healthy food. We need to address these foundational issues before we can focus on higher education and business development." The room grew tense, with several donors exchanging skeptical glances. But before anyone could object, Charles spoke up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "When I brought Jack on board, it was precisely for this reason. He has a ground-level understanding of what this community truly needs. I suggest we trust his judgment." The meeting concluded with tentative agreement to proceed with Jack's vision, but he knew he had his work cut out for him. He would need to prove that his approach could yield tangible results. As the weeks turned to months, the community center began to take shape, both physically and conceptually. Jack assembled a diverse team, prioritizing hiring from within the Riverside community whenever possible. He implemented training programs, partnering with local businesses to provide real-world experience and job opportunities. One of Jack's proudest achievements was the creation of a community garden on what had once been an abandoned lot adjacent to the center. The garden served multiple purposes, providing fresh produce for a neighborhood sorely lacking in healthy food options, offering a therapeutic space for residents to connect with nature and each other, and serving as an educational tool for children and adults alike. The day the garden officially opened was a turning point for the project. Residents from all walks of life came together to plant the first crops, their hands working the soil side by side. Jack stood back, watching as neighbors who had once been strangers laughed and chatted, sharing gardening tips and stories. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the new garden, Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Charles standing beside him, a proud smile on his face. "You've done good work here, Jack," Charles said softly. "This is more than just a garden or a building. You're growing a community. Jack nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. We're growing it together, he replied. All of us. As they stood there, watching the Riverside residents tend to their new garden, Jack realized that he too had grown. The man who had once felt invisible now stood tall, a leader and a catalyst for change. But more than that, he was a part of something bigger than himself, a community coming together to build a brighter future. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. As the day's light faded, a new light seemed to shine from within the Riverside community, a light of hope, of possibility, and of the power of human connection. And at the heart of it all stood Jack Harris, the former janitor turned community leader, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. As the Riverside Community Center took shape, both physically and in spirit, Jack Harris found himself navigating increasingly complex waters. The initial excitement and goodwill generated by the project began to face real-world challenges, testing Jack's resolve and leadership in ways he never anticipated. It was a crisp autumn morning when Jack arrived at the center, his mind already racing with the day's tasks. As he approached the building, he noticed a small group of people gathered near the entrance, their faces etched with concern and frustration. Among them, he recognized Maria Vasquez, a local resident who had been one of the center's earliest and most enthusiastic supporters. "Jack," Maria called out as he neared, her voice tinged with urgency. "We need to talk. There's a problem." Over the next hour, Jack listened as Maria and the others outlined a growing issue in the community. A recent wave of gentrification was threatening to displace longtime residents. Developers were buying up properties, raising rents, and pushing out families who had called Riverside home for generations. "The very improvements we're making here," Maria explained, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They're making the neighborhood more attractive to outsiders. People are afraid that soon they won't be able to afford to live in the community we're trying to save." Jack felt a weight settle in his chest. He had been so focused on building up the community that he hadn't fully considered the potential negative consequences of their success. It was a stark reminder that progress often came with complex, unforeseen challenges. "I understand," Jack said, his voice firm with resolve. "This isn't just about building a center anymore. We need to find a way to protect the community as we help it grow." Over the next few weeks, Jack threw himself into researching affordable housing initiatives, tenant rights, and community land trusts. He reached out to legal experts, urban planners, and community organizers, seeking advice and forming partnerships. One particularly tense meeting took place in the center's newly finished conference room. Jack sat at the head of a table surrounded by community leaders, real estate developers, and city officials. The atmosphere was charged with competing interests and barely contained frustrations. "Mr. Harris," a developer in an expensive suit began, his tone condescending, "while your dedication to this community is admirable, you must understand that progress is inevitable. The changes coming to Riverside will ultimately benefit everyone." Jack felt a flash of anger but kept his voice calm as he replied, "Progress shouldn't come at the cost of displacing the very people who have held this community together through years of neglect. There has to be a way to improve the neighborhood while protecting its longtime residents." The debate raged on, with voices rising and tempers flaring. Just when it seemed the meeting would dissolve into chaos, Jack stood up, his presence commanding attention. "Listen," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We all want what's best for Riverside. But best can't just be measured in property values or profit margins. It has to be measured in the strength of our community, in the opportunities we create for everyone, not just those who can afford luxury apartments." He laid out a proposal for a mixed-income housing development that would include affordable units for current residents, combined with a job training program to help community members access the new opportunities coming to the area. "This isn't about stopping progress," Jack concluded. "It's about ensuring that progress lifts all boats, not just the yachts." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into a mix of arguments and discussions. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Jack had opened the door to a dialogue that could lead to real, equitable change. As the weeks passed, Jack found himself increasingly pulled in different directions. The demands of running the center, advocating for the community, and navigating the complex world of urban development were taking their toll. Late nights became the norm, and Jack often found himself missing dinner with his family or his children's school events. It was Sarah, Jack's wife, who finally called him out on it. One night, as Jack was preparing to head back to the center after a hastily eaten dinner, Sarah placed a gentle but firm hand on his arm. "Jack," she said, her eyes filled with a mix of love and concern, "we need to talk." Over the next hour, Sarah laid bare her worries. While she was immensely proud of what Jack was accomplishing, she feared he was losing himself in the process. Their children missed him, and she missed her partner. "You're changing lives, Jack," Sarah said softly. "But don't forget about the lives here at home that need you too." The conversation was a wake-up call for Jack. He realized that in his determination to lift up the Riverside community, he had been neglecting his own. It was a poignant reminder that true success couldn't come at the expense of what mattered most. The next day, Jack called a meeting with his team at the center. He explained that he needed to step back slightly, to delegate more, and to find a sustainable balance between his work and his family life. To his surprise and relief, his team rallied around him, offering support and stepping up to take on more responsibilities. This shift in approach led to an unexpected but welcome development. By empowering his team and the community members involved in the center's programs, Jack found that the project began to take on a life of its own. Ideas flowed more freely, and a true sense of community ownership began to emerge. One particularly inspiring moment came during a town hall meeting held in the center's main hall. Jack had organized the gathering to discuss the ongoing challenges of gentrification and community development. But instead of leading the meeting as he usually would, he decided to take a step back and let the community's voices take center stage. As residents stood up one by one to share their experiences, ideas, and concerns, Jack watched in awe. The shy teenager who had once barely spoken above a whisper was now confidently presenting a plan for a youth entrepreneurship program. The elderly gentleman who had initially been skeptical of the entire project was passionately arguing for the expansion of the community garden into a full-fledged urban farm. In that moment, Jack realized that the true success of the Riverside Community Center wasn't in the programs he had initiated or the buildings he had helped construct. It was in the way the community had come together, found its voice, and begun to shape its own future. As the meeting wound down, Maria Vasquez approached Jack, a warm smile on her face. "You know, Jack," she said, her eyes twinkling, "when you first came here, some of us thought you were just another outsider with big ideas and no understanding. But you proved us wrong. You didn't just build a center. You helped us build a community." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "Every person in this room, every resident of Riverside, you're the ones who made this happen. I just helped clear the path a little." In the months that followed, the Riverside Community Center continued to evolve and grow. The mixed-income housing development that Jack had proposed began to take shape, providing affordable homes for longtime residents alongside new community members. The job training programs expanded, partnering with local businesses and even some of the very developers who had initially been at odds with the center's mission. But perhaps the most significant change was in Jack himself. He had found a balance between his work at the center and his life at home. He was present for family dinners, his children's school events, and quiet evenings with Sarah. And rather than diminishing his impact on the community, this balance seemed to enhance it. He approached his work with renewed energy and perspective, able to see the bigger picture and inspire others to do the same. 1 year to the day after the center's opening, a celebration was held in the now thriving community garden. Residents from all walks of life gathered among the lush vegetable beds and blooming flowers. Children laughed and played on the newly installed playground equipment, while adults chatted and shared dishes made with produce grown in the very garden where they stood. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd, Charles Anderson stepped up to address the community. He spoke of the center's journey, of the challenges overcome and the victories celebrated. But when it came time to introduce Jack, he paused, a knowing smile on his face. "You know," Charles said, his voice carrying across the garden, I could stand here and list all of Jack Harris's accomplishments over the past year. I could tell you about the programs he's implemented, the partnerships he's forged, the lives he's touched. But I don't think that's necessary, because when I look around this garden, when I walk through the streets of Riverside, I see Jack's true accomplishment. I see a community that has found its strength, its voice, and its heart. As Jack stepped up to speak, he was overwhelmed by the sight before him. Faces that had once been etched with worry and resignation now shone with hope and determination. The transformation wasn't just in the buildings or the programs, it was in the spirit of the people themselves. When I first came to Riverside, Jack began, his voice thick with emotion, I thought I was here to help change a community. What I didn't realize was how much this community would change me. Each one of you has taught me something invaluable about resilience, about compassion, about what it truly means to be part of something bigger than ourselves. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, faces that had become as familiar and dear to him as his own family. This center, this garden, these programs, they're not mine. They're ours. We built them together, and together we'll keep building, keep growing, keep lifting each other up. Because that's what community is all about. As Jack's words hung in the air, a spontaneous applause erupted, growing into a standing ovation. Tears were shed, hugs were shared, and in that moment, the true power of community was palpable. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Jack found himself standing at the edge of the garden, looking out over the neighborhood he had come to love. Sarah appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "You did it, Jack," she said softly. Jack shook his head, a gentle smile on his face. "No," he replied, squeezing her hand. "We did it. All of us." As they stood there, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant hues, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From an invisible janitor to a community leader, he had discovered the profound impact that one person could have when they chose to stand up for what was right, to believe in the potential of others, and to work tirelessly for the greater good. But more than that, he had learned that true change, lasting change, came not from the efforts of one individual, but from the collective power of a community united in purpose and spirit. The story of Riverside, of the community center, of Jack Harris himself, was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. But it was a story now being written by many hands, guided by shared dreams and a common vision of a better future for all. As night fell over Riverside, the twinkling lights of the garden party reflected the stars emerging in the sky above. In homes throughout the neighborhood, families spoke of plans for tomorrow. Children dreamed of new possibilities, and a sense of hope and belonging permeated the very air. And at the heart of it all stood the Riverside Community Center, a beacon of what could be accomplished when people came together, believed in each other, and worked towards a common good. It stood as a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of community, and the profound change that can begin with a single act of kindness. Jack Harris, once an invisible janitor, now stood tall as a visible reminder that every person has the potential to make a difference, that every voice deserves to be heard, and that together we can build a world where dignity, opportunity, and hope are not privileges for the few, but rights for all. As he and Sarah walked home hand in hand, Jack knew that his journey, their journey, was far from over. But with each step, he walked with the strength of a community behind him, the love of his family beside him, and the unwavering belief that the best was yet to come.